This is session 1 of our Garden, the Tree of Life series. So the best place to start off with any story is right at the beginning. So let's see. Genesis 2 verse 9. And out of the ground the Lord God made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now I grew up knowing that there were definitely 2 trees planted in the garden, and these two trees, I always used to think one was good and one was evil. And I know many people still today believe this, that our choice lies between whether we do good or whether we do evil. You can either eat from the good or from the evil. But listen to this. It's not speaking about 2 trees meaning good and evil. The one tree he names, he says, the one tree is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the second tree is the tree of life. So the 2 trees are knowledge of good and evil, one, and the other one, the tree of life. So if you just think about that, the second tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, literally means where we decide what is good and wrong. You know, you have the knowledge, the wisdom, the insight to know what is good and what is bad, which literally comes to the point where it says you judge. You judge what is good and what is evil based on what you decide. So you are dependent on yourself. So then, needless to say, if dependence on yourself, where you decide what's good and evil, is the one tree and the other tree is the tree of life, it's actually quite clear to see that there's no life in us deciding and judging for ourselves what is good and evil, because life is with the other tree. Let's go on. Same, Genesis 2, just in verse 16, if you go a bit down, verse 16 and 17. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. So he said, you will eat of every tree, just don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So when he says eat of every tree, that includes the tree of life. The tree of life was opened from the beginning. We had this opportunity to eat the fruit of the tree of life. Now, just a quick mention, we are now in Genesis 2 verse 16 and 17, but Eve has not yet been created. This commandment of you shall not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was given to Adam, not to Eve. So then when we go on, we can see in verse 21, which is down the line, Eve was created. So when Eve was deceived by the snake to actually take this fruit, she was not disobedient. She was deceived. But Adam was indeed disobedient. And we can even find this in Romans 5 verse 12, where it says that sin came in by the transgression of one man. Sin did not come in by the transgression of Adam and Eve, but by one man. Speaking of Adam who was disobedient while Eve was deceived. Then in Genesis 3 verse 7, we get to this point where they took the fruit and they ate of the fruit, and then what happened? Genesis 3 verse 7. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves covering. Now, interestingly to see, they did not become naked. They became aware of their nakedness, even though they already were naked, just not aware of it. So, in becoming aware of their own nakedness, they ran to the fig tree and took fig leaves and sewed themselves clothes to actually cover up this nakedness, which was always there, but they were not aware of this nakedness. But then, just look at this, verse 8. And they heard the sound of God, of the Lord God, walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Then Then the Lord called to Adam and said to him, "Where are you?" So, both of them ate the fruit. Both of them sewed fig leaves together and made clothes. Both of them hid from God. But when God came to them, He did not ask them, "Where are you?" He asked Adam, "Adam, where are you?" Now, why is this? Eve was not disobedient. Eve was deceived, but Adam was disobedient to the commandment, to the law that God gave. You should not eat of this tree. And now He asked Adam, "Adam, where are you?" Now, we know God is omnipotent and ever present. He knows everything and sees everything. So, could it be that God did not know where Adam was? That's not possible. Of course, He knew where Adam was. Why did He then ask Adam, "Where are you?" Because Adam did not know where he was. Adam was unaware of this new situation that he has found him in. He became more aware of his nakedness than the presence of God. So he was not mindful of God anymore, but of himself. This is literally the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, where I become more aware of me and myself than of God and His presence. And it's actually so lovely to see that in this, God already knew where He was, what had happened, but He did not come with wrath and vengeance. God came with a loving heart. He came looking for them, and He said, "Adam, where are you? I am still looking for you, even though you have lost your awareness of me and became aware of your own nakedness." In fact, if you just go down to verse 21, we read, "Also for Adam and his wife the Lord God made tunics of skin and clothed them." Not only didn't He come to them and rebuked them and came with wrath and vengeance, He also made clothes for them, and He covered them, their nakedness, so that they would no longer be aware of their nakedness, to cover them and show them how He feels about them. So He did not only give it to them for protection, He gave it to them because He cared. He was a loving God, a loving Father right from the start. So, interestingly enough, Adam and Eve went to the fig tree and they took fig leaves. This is quite important, especially later on in the story, because this whole image behind the fig tree and the fig leaves speaks about us being dependent on ourselves, us being eaten of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, where we depend on ourselves, ran to the fig tree trying to cover it for ourselves. But God knew better. God used skins. Why? Because He knew blood was required to cover sins. Not only just to cover them, but blood had to be shed in order to save mankind. So we can just go on in Genesis 3 and then down the next verse, verse 22. "Then the Lord God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil." Eating of the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, he now had the knowledge of good and evil to depend and decide for himself. So he had become like God. This is what he says. And then he goes on, "And now let he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever." Quite important. To eat of the tree of life is where you get life and you will live forever. To stop this, therefore, the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. So He drove out the man, and He placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Now look at this. They were, after this whole fall of man, and they became aware of themselves, God put them out of the garden to keep them from eating from the tree of life, so that they would not continually live in this way where they depend on themselves. So He put them out and put the sword at the entrance of the gate. This way that was now closed to the let's read this. That last part. He put that flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. It does not even mention paradise. It does not mention Eden or the garden or heaven. It's not even mentioning the way to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It simply mentions the way to the tree of life that was closed, that was cut off. Because if they would continue to eat of this tree, they would truly live forever. So after being put out of this garden, a lot of things happened, but then we come to a certain point where Jesus comes. And he came to be the sacrifice, to be the skin, this blood sacrifice for us. And this we'll pick up in session 2.